Hello, sixth grade, and welcome to Unit 3, Week 4. So we're going to begin with our vocab words today. Our first word is the word prominent. To be prominent is to be easily noticeable or well known. So a prominent figure in history is maybe someone who's really important, an important historical figure. A prominent team member may be the best player on the team. So someone who or something that is easy to notice or well known. Next, we have the word adept. If you're adept at something, that means you're really good at it. So you can be adept at juggling, for example. You can be adept at multiplying using mental math. Next, we have the word spectators. Spectators are basically comes from the word spec, from the root spec, which means to watch. So spectators are basically people who watch something. Next, we have the word aristocracy. An aristocracy is an elite group of people who rank above others due to their privilege of birth, their wealth, their achievement. So usually aristocracy is you're either think of royals, kings and queens and princes and princesses, people who are really, really wealthy. That is the group that makes up your aristocracy. Now, next we have the word prevail. To prevail means to either succeed or win. So you can say he prevailed in the race, or the hero prevailed at the end of the story. That means, they did what they meant to do, they won, they achieved their goal. Next, we have the word collective. Collective means it involves everyone. So think about the word collect. You're putting everything together. So the crowd held one collective breath. So if everyone's holding their breath while they're waiting to see, if the player was able to kick the soccer ball into the goal, they collectively held their breath, right? It's everybody doing it at the same time. Next, we have the word perseverance. Perseverance is a continuous course of action, often in spite of difficulty. When you persevere, that means you are doing something no matter how hard it is, no matter how many things get in your way, you are determined. So perseverance is kind of a synonym for determination, right? It's you deciding that you're going to do something even when it's difficult, even when, there are things in the way. And next we have the word trailblazer. So a leader who leaves a path for others to follow in a new or unfamiliar endeavor is called a trailblazer. That means someone who basically tries out something new, they create a path or set a course where other people can follow in their footsteps. Those people are considered trailblazers. All right, next, let's take a look at your spelling. So your spelling words this week are going to focus on words with prefixes. Now, your spelling words this week are the words superhuman, independent, incomplete, supermarket, outstanding, uncommon, tangle, incredible, outpost, enlist, superstar, outlaw, proclaim, unsightly, unknown, prolong, enrich, enlarge, outfield, outcry, address, cousin, people, indistinct, and unequal. So let's talk about prefixes. Now, prefixes come from the word affix, which means to stick to something or to attach to something. So a prefix is attached to the beginning of a word. It comes before your main word. Now, we have a lot of prefixes that we use really commonly. Re means again. So if you were asked to rewrite or to rewash or to reread, that means to do that thing again. Un means not, like unhappy or unfair. Dis means the opposite of something. So if you dislike something, if something disappears. Then we have the prefix en, en, means to cause or to put into. So when you enlarge something, you're causing it to become bigger. In means not. So inconsistent. Someone who's not doing something consistently is inconsistent. Next, we have the prefix out. Out means more or greater than something. So if you outgrow something, you are more than the size of that thing. If you outnumber, that means you're greater than the number that you've got. Next, we have the prefix pre, which means before, like preheat. If you preheat the oven before you bake your cookies, you have to warm it up first. If you get a prepaid phone, that means you pay for it in advance before you get it. We also have the prefix pro, which means approving of something, in favor of something, something that's moving forward or positive, like progress, something that's moving forward. To proceed means to move forward. Inter means between. So if you interrupt someone, that means you're speaking in between their words. Intersect means something that crosses between things. International means between countries. Super means above or more than normal or excessive, like supersize. You're making something more than the regular size. Or superhuman, someone who has more than normal human abilities. All right, next, our comprehension skill and strategy for this week is to summarize and to look at the cause and effect. So when you summarize a story, you're telling the most important events and details in your own words, but in a much shorter way. So you're not retelling everything word for word. You're just telling the important bits. So this is helpful to remember what you read. You can summarize something after you finish reading, or you can summarize as you're reading it. So maybe after each paragraph or after each page. So summarizing helps you to identify the most important ideas in a text and incorporate the central and main ideas. So you can summarize a reading by asking yourself and answering these questions. Who, like who was it about? What did they do? They did what? When did they do it? Where? In what way? That's the how. And why? What was the purpose or the reason behind it? Now, for cause-effect relationships, these are relationships where a certain event, which is the cause, makes another event happen, which is the effect. So the cause explains why something happened. It's the reason that it happened. The effect is what happened because of it. So the student left the chair pulled out, so his classmate tripped over it. So when the student left the chair pulled out, that was the cause, that the chair was stuck out of place. A classmate tripped over it, that was the effect. I took my dog for a walk, he was really happy. So why was he happy? What was the cause of his happiness? The cause was going for a walk. Next we have, when I added vinegar to baking soda, a chemical reaction occurred. So mixing the vinegar and baking soda is the cause. The effect, what happened when I mixed them, it created a chemical reaction. And last, after the rain, the park was wet and muddy. The cause was the rain. What happened because of the rain? The park got wet and muddy. So next we're going to talk about our genre, which is informational text, specifically about biographies. Now, in a biography, you're sharing a variety, it's a kind of nonfiction text that shares true events and it can have photos and illustrations, right? It shares events of somebody's life. It's the story of someone's life that's written by another person. A biography is not written by the person themselves, it's written by somebody else. Now, when you're talking about someone writing the story of their own life, that becomes an autobiography. We'll talk about those another time. So a biography is written in the third person, so it uses pronouns such as he or she because the author is generally not part of the story. It's written in formal language. It uses compound and complex sentences. It contains connectives and connecting ideas. It's written in the past tense and usually written in chronological order, which means in time order. So things are being told to you in the order that they happened in that person's life. So some of the key features of a biography are that they include the name, date, and place of birth of an individual. They talk about the person's life. They talk about their education and their occupation, which means their job, any important life events that happened to them, the area where they made achievements or progress, things where they were doing stuff that was important, and the individual's significance to their field and their impact on the world. So why were they important in whatever area they were working in? How did it impact the life of people around them? All right, next we'll talk about vocab strategies. We're going to talk specifically about paragraph clues. So context and paragraph clues are hints that you find in a sentence, a paragraph, or a passage that the reader can use to understand the meaning of new or unfamiliar words. Now, you can find clues in the base words, in the roots, in the affixes, so prefixes, suffixes can help you understand. And sometimes the context of the sentence will also help you figure out whether a word is a noun, an adjective, or a verb, so depending on how it's being used. So it's very helpful for you to gather as many of these clues as you can before you make any educated guess about what the word means. All right, so first let's take a look at the process for finding and interpreting context clues. So first, you want to stop and reread the sentence. Pay attention to the words that come before it and the words that come after it, whatever this unfamiliar word is. Identify your context clues. So what clues can you gather to figure out the meaning? Make a guess about the word's meaning and check your guess in context. So what does this mean? That means read the sentence again and substitute what you think it means for your unknown word and see if your sentence still makes sense. Next, we're going to talk about the types of context clues that you can find. So you can find example clues, which means you have a specific example of something that gives the reader an idea of what the unknown word means. So cued by the phrase such as, including, consists of, like, and for example, all of these are cues. These are clues for you to figure out that they're giving an example. So during a tornado, be aware of potential hazards, such as broken glass and sharp objects. So you know hazards are something that have to do with things that are dangerous, like broken glass is dangerous, sharp objects are dangerous. Now you can also find synonyms or definition clues in your sentence or your paragraph. So a synonym or a definition of the word may be used in the sentence to help the reader understand what the unfamiliar word means. So if you're in a tall building during a tornado, locate the nearest enclosure or room to seek shelter. So they gave you a synonym for enclosure here. They said or room. So they gave, this was both a synonym and kind of an example. Or they can give you the antonym or contrasting clues. So on the other hand, antonyms or contrasts are sometimes provided to give readers helpful clues. So I can say sometimes tornadoes develop so rapidly that there's no time to send a warning. Other times they develop gradually and there is more time to provide advance warning. So here, rapidly and gradually are antonyms. So when they're talking about it happening rapidly, they're telling you there's no time. Got to be real quick. But then when they say gradually and they provide the clues about gradually, you know that, okay, we're talking about the opposite. Gradually means there's more time, things are slowed down, they're not happening as quickly. All right, so that takes us through our vocab strategy for paragraph clues. Next, we're going to start talking about grammar. So for our grammar, we're going to first talk about what a verb is. So a verb tells you what the subject is or does. So to find the verb, you ask yourself, what does the sentence tell us that the subject is or that the subject does? These can be actions that you can observe, or they can be feelings and actions that cannot be seen. What does that mean? Let's take a look. Let's think about that. So if you like a particular book, liking is a verb. You can't see when someone likes something, but it's a thing that they experience or they feel. If you love your siblings, love is something that you do, but it's not necessarily something that you can see. Now we're going to talk about linking verbs. Linking verbs connect the subject of your sentence to a noun or an adjective in that same sentence. So it's a connecting verb. It's a linking verb, right? It connects one part to the other. Most of the time, your linking verbs are different forms of the word be. So this is different from a helping verb because it's not paired with another verb. You're not sticking it together with another verb. So different forms of the word be are am, is, are, was, were, be, and been. Now, other linking verbs that we can look at are the words look, seem, appear, become, feel, grow, smell, taste. These all basically link your subject to another noun or to an adjective. So I can say, I am late for the pizza party. She is my best friend. I do my chores every morning. I look for my mom in the crowd. She feels grumpy today. The baby appears to like apples. So these are all linking something, your subject, to something else in the sentence, another noun or an adjective. Now you can have linking verbs that show tense. So they can show you past tense, present tense, or future tense. So past tense is like was, were, or been. Those tell you about something that happened before. Present tense is, am, or are. And future tense is will be. These all give you clues about when something is happening. Now, the noun that follows, or the noun that comes after a linking verb, renames or identifies the subject. The adjective that follows a linking verb describes the subject. That is called a predicate adjective because it's found in the predicate part of the sentence. All right, next let's take a look at titles and capitalization. Titles always begin with a capital letter, no matter what the word is. All major words in a title are also capitalized. So we don't use a capital letter for articles, which are basically the words a, and the, unless they're the first word in the title. Any of your conjunctions, any of your fanboys, for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so, again, unless they are the first word in the title. Any prepositions, so words that show direction, time, place, location, relationships, so words like above, across, against, along, at, near, into, all of these. There's a long list of them. I put a bunch of them right here for you. Those are not capitalized, again, unless they're the first word in the title. Now, we always underline or italicize. So when you italicize something, you basically write it kind of slanted like this. You underline or italicize the titles of major works, such as books, newspapers, and magazines. So The Mouse and the Motorcycle, that's a book, I underlined it. Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, another book, I underlined it. The New York Times is a newspaper, so I italicized that. Highlights Magazine is a magazine, I italicized that. You can also use quotation marks around smaller works like poems or songs or short stories. So The Raven is a poem by Edgar Allan Poe. So we put quotation marks around it. Baby Shark is a song. Where the Sidewalk Ends is a poem by Shel Silverstein. Now remember, capitalize all the major words also in product names like companies. So Nike, Apple, Samsung, Google. You capitalize the important words in there the same way you capitalize in the title of a book. So product names don't require underlining, italicizing, or quotation marks. If it's a product, if it's a thing you buy, like any one of these, you don't have to do anything to it other than capitalize it. That takes us to the end of our grammar notes. Next, we're going to get into our weekly reading.
Genre, biography. Essential question. How can one person affect the opinions of others? Read the true story of one of the world's first cycling champions. Major Taylor, Champion Cyclist, by Lisa Klein Ransom. Illustrated by James E. Ransom. In Indianapolis, Indiana, there was a street lined with bicycle shops from one end to the other. Visitors would marvel at each window displayed with the most up-to-date models along that stretch of North Pennsylvania Avenue, locals called Bicycle Row. Right at the center sat the Hay and Willits Bicycle Shop. Thomas Hay, Bert Willits, proprietors. It was this shop young Marshall Taylor visited when his own bicycle needed fixing. Marshall was 13 years old, and waiting patiently was not one of the things he did best. So while he waited, he kept himself busy trying out new stunts. Then, the repairs made, he used one of his fancy mounts to climb quickly onto his bicycle. If he hurried, he could still finish his newspaper route before supper. As Marshall left, Mr. Hay shouted, "Hey, son, that was some stunt work." "Oh, those?" said Marshall. "I have a lot more. Want to see?" And without waiting for an answer, he began his demonstration with an acrobatic mount. Round and round the store he rode, first backward, then forward on the handlebars, each move more daring than the last. By the time he'd finished, everyone in the store was applauding for more. "How'd you get so good?" Tom Hay asked the boy. Marshall explained that he'd taught himself quite a collection of tricks, riding on the long stretches of country road between his newspaper stops. Are you looking for work? For $6 a week, all you need to do is sweep, straighten, and show off some of those stunts, and you've got yourself a job. $6 to clean and do tricks? Marshall asked. Why, that paid $1 more than his paper route. Okay, we'll throw in a new bike, too, countered Bert Willits. I'll take it, Marshall shouted. How did a 13-year-old black teenager in 1891 come to be such a crackerjack cyclist, or even to own a bicycle? Mr. Hay and Mr. Willits wondered. And so Marshall told them of his father's job as a coachman to the prominent Southard family, and how at the age of 8 he'd been hired as the live-in companion of their only son. It was then that Marshall began his new life of luxury: private tutoring, fine clothing, a playroom stacked with toys. But what Marshall loved most was the bicycle the Southards had given him. He'd never seen anything like its smooth, curved lines of metal, so shiny and new, and so utterly modern. He jumped on at once, knowing those wheels could carry him faster than his legs ever could. And sure enough, in no time, he became the top cyclist in the neighborhood. Amongst stately Victorian houses and tree-lined streets, in each and every race, Marshall breezed by the other boys, aware only of the wind against his face and the road he left behind. For the days when Marshall was to perform, Mr. Hay outfitted him in a uniform with elaborate braidings and shimmery gold buttons. Crowds gathered afternoons at 4 p.m. sharp to watch Marshall on the sidewalk outside the store. They were amazed by the young man in military uniform, so adept on 2 wheels. "He looks like a little major," they would marvel. Then they'd filter into the store to request private lessons and try out the bicycles that could make that little major do his tricks. Hay and Willits' bicycle shop had finally made a name for itself, and the owners had the kid everyone now called Major Taylor to thank for it. The annual 10-mile road race, sponsored by Hay and Willits, was one of the biggest sporting events in Indianapolis. Each year, an elaborate gold medal for the winner was displayed in their window, on view for all. Marshall liked to put down his cleaning rags and stop to admire it. He'd adjust it, polish it, and hold it up to the light to watch it sparkle. Once he even tried it on, smiling at his own reflection in the window. "Major Taylor, champion cyclist," he whispered to himself. Early on the morning of the race, Marshall took his place among hundreds of spectators. He'd never seen a bicycle race up close, and he didn't want to miss a single detail. When Mr. Hay spotted Marshall, he waved to him. "Come on over here, young man. You must start in this race," he insisted. "I don't think I can do it," Marshall protested. "Why, it's no different than riding with your friends," he encouraged. "Look, just start up the road and come back when you're tired. The crowd will love it." Bang! The starting pistol sounded, and Marshall was off, pedaling hard and fast, hoping only to keep pace with the others. "Just till I get tired, just till I get tired," he kept repeating, his legs pumping as fast as his heart. Gradually, the rhythmic creaks of the other bicycles faded, and all he could hear was his own panting. Time fell away as he struggled to maintain speed, and the wind whipped his face. Out of nowhere, Mr. Hay appeared, shouting and dangling the gold medal. "You're a mile ahead. Keep going." Now he thought he could make out a swell of spectators gathered at the finish. Pushing with everything he had, his legs cramped with exhaustion, he burst through the winning tape and then collapsed. When he came to, sore, stiff, and exhausted, the crowd's cheers were ringing in his ears. At 13 years old, Marshall Taylor had won his first race. Back at the shop, Marshall's dreams now stretched far beyond the walls of Hay and Willets. More than anything, he wanted to be a professional cyclist. One by one, he committed to memory the names of racers who'd visited the shop. Arthur Zimmerman, Willie Windle of Massachusetts, and Louis "Birdie" Munger, who had recently opened a racing workshop in town. As Marshall grew to know Munger, he began spending more and more time at his shop. He'd follow him to the track, pleading, "Tell me about the race when—" Birdie was tickled by Marshall. In fact, the boy reminded him of a younger version of himself. "You've got talent, but you've got to keep working," Birdie instructed after one of Marshall's many wins. Soon Marshall had been hired as his assistant, running errands and doing chores. When Birdie decided to move to Worcester, Massachusetts, he invited Marshall along. After a fond farewell to his family, Marshall set off with Birdie to begin training. To anyone who'd listened, he would boast, "I am going to make Major Marshall Taylor the fastest bicycle rider in the world." Marshall's talent grew as fast as his popularity. It wasn't long before racing fans, although they may not have known the name Marshall Taylor, knew there was a young Negro causing quite a stir. But by the time Marshall turned professional at age 18, challenges off the track began to trail him like a shadow. All of the large purses won in races all over the country couldn't buy him a meal in a restaurant or a room in a hotel. Cities like Louisville, St. Louis, and even Indianapolis wouldn't permit a black man on their tracks. Their entry forms read, "For white riders only." Still, that couldn't keep Marshall down. As the only Negro granted membership in the League of American Wheelmen, he was entitled to compete on any track he chose. "You're never going to finish this race," riders would holler above the noise of the crowd, or, "This race is going to be your last," they'd taunt. Working as a group, they'd box him out. Racing next to him, they'd poke and jab him. They agreed that if they defeated him, the winner would split the prize money with the others. But usually there was no prize money to split. For every trick they tried, Taylor had his own. Marshall's style had always been to stay behind the pack. "Save it for the finish," he would recite to himself. Wearing his lucky number 13 armband, he'd keep pace, then ride full speed in the final yards. But when the competition turned crueler, he had to adjust his style. As soon as he'd spot a clearing in the pack, he'd cut through and make his way to the front. And that's where he stayed, all the way across the finish line. The Black Whirlwind, as he was called by the press, had his own set of rules. Ride clean and ride fair. Asked by reporters how he managed to keep calm despite attacks by other cyclists, Marshall answered, "I simply ride away." Munger's prediction years earlier had come true. Major Marshall Taylor was now the fastest bicycle rider in the world. After he won the 1899 World Championship title, beating out the Butler brothers, offers to compete abroad flooded his home. Promises of money and racing against the world's best cyclists were too much to resist. In 1900, friends and family said goodbye as Marshall boarded the Kaiser Wilhelm de Grosse, proud to be representing his country on his first European racing tour. From the moment he arrived in France, fans swarmed around him, welcoming Le Nègre Volant, the Flying Negro. At every Parisian café, hotel, and track, they followed for a chance to shake his hand. The press reported his every move, and he was invited into the homes of aristocracy. Halfway around the world, Marshall Taylor was finally getting the recognition and respect he had worked for his whole life. It was not on a starting line, but rather at the Café Espérance that Marshall met the French champion, Edmond Jacquelin. "Welcome to Paris, Monsieur Taylor," he greeted, smiling broadly, and with that, the two became instant friends. Jacquelin, winner of the 1900 World Championship, French Championship, and Grand Prix of Paris, the Triple Crown of racing, was a sharp contrast to the 1899 world champion. Everyone wondered who would prevail in the next race, the quiet, gentlemanly Taylor or the explosive, larger-than-life Jacqueline. Long before Taylor and Jacqueline arrived at Le Parc des Princes Velodrome for their race, crowds had gathered, straining for a glimpse of the two rivals. Shivering against the cold, Taylor stood at the starting line dressed in layers to protect himself from the biting wind. Was this the flying Negro from America the fans had heard so much about? Meanwhile, Jacqueline strode onto the track. "Vive Taylor! Vive Jacqueline!" shouted the crowd as more fans huddled beyond the gates. The race was on. When it was over, roars of applause rang out to the beat of the French national anthem. "Edmond Jacqueline, the victor in 2 straight heats," came the announcement. To schedule a rematch so close to the first race was unheard of, but the crowds demanded it. "Who will be king?" asked Lotto Velo. Would it be the 1899 or the 1900 world champion, America or France, Taylor or Jacqueline? As the men took their positions at the start of the first heat and strapped their feet to their pedals, the crowd held one collective breath. Bang! Jacqueline jumped comfortably into the lead. Marshall concentrated on erasing all thoughts of their first race from his mind. He leaned lower over his handlebars, and from high in the stands, fans looked down on the shadow of a figure lying almost flat, inching closer and closer to his rival.